It may look like a harmless bagel toaster, but inside is a deadly donut. How do you know PlayStation is not a normal game system?
Hey everybody, welcome back to Game Esoterica and our continuing series, the PlayStation 1 Paradise, where I take a look at some of my favorite PlayStation 1 games of all time, both in 3D and in 2D, and if you can't tell already, we're playing Tekken 3 today, because the Tekken franchise was so synonymous with PlayStation 1 hardware, and while all of the games are fun, I think most people would be in agreement when I say Tekken 3 is the best Tekken game on the hardware. Before we get too far involved though, do me a huge favor, down below hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. But Tekken 3 just basically takes everything that Tekken and Tekken 2 did, amplifies it, makes it better, increases the character roster, and is overall the most quintessentially complete version of Tekken on PlayStation 1 hardware. And if you can't tell already, Eddie is usually my main, but I'm going to jump around with different characters here to give you an idea of what the overall roster looks like. But Tekken was basically Namco's answer to what Sega was doing in arcades with Virtua Fighter. Every single thing that Sega made, and Namco had a version of it. For every Daytona, there's a Ridge Racer. For every Virtua Fighter, there's going to be a Tekken. And for every Virtual Cop, there's going to be a Time Crisis. Sega and Namco were in a heated battle to be the champion of arcades. And honestly, and I hate to admit this because I am a huge Sega fan, Tekken 3 is a better game than Virtua Fighter 2. I don't think it's a better game than Virtua Fighter 3, but that is my opinion. If you're going to choose one game to play, Virtua Fighter 2 on the Sega Saturn or Tekken 3 on the PlayStation 1, I think Namco did beat Sega at their own game when they made this entry. It is just a fast, fluid, easy to learn, hard to master fighting game that really sucks you in with just how presentable and fun it is, but then keeps you around for the absolutely deep mechanics. Now, I am only a casual Tekken player. I definitely play a lot more Virtua Fighter than I do this game, but I have loved this franchise and I pick up every single entry when it comes out. And I would say over the years, Tekken has definitely succeeded versus Virtua Fighter because we're still playing Virtua Fighter 5 or different reiterations of it to this day, and that game came out a very long time ago on basically Xbox 360 era hardware. But so much less of the history involved in the video. Let's talk about the actual gameplay. Tekken is such an easy game to understand. You have your kicks, you have your punches, you have a jump, which never seems to be super effective unless you're trying to do a grapple, at least in my opinion. But you have so many different character types with so many different movesets. You get to choose who works for you and make that your main, and then maybe take a secondary from there. Somebody like King here, definitely a grappler, is going to do a lot of damage, but it's going to be a situation where if you miss, you're going to be quite slow. Where somebody like Eddie here with his capoeira style dance move fighting, the fluidity is second to none. You need to learn how to chain all of his different movesets, strikes, and grapples together, but if you get a good little thing going, you can really get the fluidity working for you, and you can take an opponent's life bar basically down to zero within 15 to 20 seconds. Which feels very close to something like Virtua Fighter, where a round could be 10 seconds and completely end. You'll see here, it's just so fun to kind of just move around with Eddie, get the cadence to his movements, and see what you can do with a character. It's so much fun to learn all of these different movesets, and there's so many different hidden fighters in this game as well. Playing through the different modes and unlocking different characters back in the day kept the longevity of this game huge, and if you're coming back to it in 2024, it's going to do the same thing for you. And if you can't tell already, I'm playing this via emulation with Duckstation because I was thinking about doing it on original hardware, but I decided to convince more people to either play this for the first time or check it out again, that I would show you the easiest and most modern way to play. And you'll see as law here, I absolutely decimated my opponent in less than 15 seconds, and that's about as close as you can get to Bruce Lee without having a copyright infringement lawsuit lodged against Namco. You can totally tell that some of these characters are 100% themed and inspired by actual real-world people, but it 100% does work. And playing as Law, you kind of feel like you're playing a Bruce Lee game that you never actually got a chance to play back in the day because it didn't exist. But when I say this game is just a perfect game, there's absolutely nothing I could complain about with it. I don't know what I would improve whatsoever on the Tekken 3 formula. Try as I might, I can't think of anything that this game could do better than it's already doing. And for its time and era, it's got some really good 3D FMV with some fun storytelling as well as a great soundtrack. So go ahead and watch and listen for 45 seconds. I'll come back with a lot more Tekken 3. Enjoy. The FMVs are really good and the music is intense, and the best part about Tekken 3 is that if you win the game in arcade mode with any of the characters that are available from the start, you're going to get these awesome FMV sequences in the end, basically their credits, because Tekken 3 has a lot of story, more than I think any other arcade fighting game did of its era. But tell me down below if you can remember a game with more story, because I really can't think of it. But Nina here, moving over to Virtua Fighter 3 for just a moment, is basically Sarah. There is a lot of overlap in these games, and you can almost say ever so slightly that maybe the Namco developers that did Tekken used a little bit too much inspiration from Virtua Fighter, but I totally understand why you might do that. If you're going to quote-unquote borrow inspiration, you may as well do it from the best, and Sega with Virtua Fighter was the best in their era, so I understand why that happens. But if you've never played Virtua Fighter 3, definitely check it out. There is a lot of overlap between that game and something like Tekken 3, because they were out basically always around the same time. But as we move further into this game, it's just such a fluid experience. That's the best takeaway from a game like Tekken. The controls are responsive and snappy, all of the characters move fast, the jumps are fluid. It is the anti-Virtua Fighter as well as jumping is concerned. When you jump in Tekken 3, it seems like the gravity might actually be more than real world, versus in something like Virtua Fighter where it seems like you're on the moon when you're jumping around. The overall reaction speed, though, in Tekken 3 is so fast and intense, it makes battles go quickly, but it feels like everything is just flying by your eyes. When you're playing well, it sometimes feels like you don't even know what you're doing. Your fingers are doing all the work, and you're just basically watching the match happen in front of you. But I'm going to give you one sample of the in-game soundtrack, not as an FMV, so go ahead and enjoy that, and I'll come back and talk a little bit more about the history of Tekken versus Virtua Fighter, but I do love this track. It's a hot one, so enjoy it. It's just a great soundtrack, and let's go down the list of things that Tekken 3 just does right. The soundtrack's spectacular. The graphics for a late-era PlayStation 1 game were absolutely stunning. The fighting mechanics, the inputs, all of the different movesets, 10 out of 10. As you go down the list of what something like a game could do right or wrong, Tekken 3 checks all the boxes as being amazing. The only strange thing about Tekken 3, and I've thought this since I first played the game, is the actual final boss is the easiest opponent you're going to fight in any single match in the game. You're going to see I absolutely decimate Ogre here with a perfect, like it's not a challenge whatsoever. I've always wondered if this is almost a coding error. I'm playing this at normal difficulty, and while I don't really have any issues getting to the boss, it still is the easiest boss battle in any fighting game. This is the complete opposite of something like an SNK game on the Neo Geo, where beating the boss was basically an exercise in frustration. Here in Tekken 3, it's basically like a freebie gimme, which is not the worst thing in the world, but when you have a boss in a fighting game, it should actually be relatively challenging. So I guess if I could find one thing to say about Tekken 3 that I don't think is perfection, it would be the final boss. But honestly, if you're getting into playing fighting games, or been playing them forever, you're not here to fight against the CPU, you're here to fight against your friends. But like I said, you get an FMV sequence for every single character once you win the game, and they're pretty hilarious. If you just follow along here, the story is not the best thing in the world, but it was good for the arcade era. But how this particular story ends is just one of the funniest things for me here. She's going to put the flowers on the grave, and then she's going to look up, and something very distinctive is going to happen. There's going to be a flashback, there's going to be a little bit of comforting, and our character here is going to slap the ever-loving taste out of her friend's mouth. It doesn't make any sense unless you know all of the canon of Tekken, but honestly it doesn't matter. It is a very fun way to end a particular story with a slap that knocked her into next week. But honestly, Tekken 3, in my opinion, is just a perfect game. 10 out of 10s all the way across the board. It's so synonymous with the PlayStation 1, and that's why, of course, I had to cover it here on this series. But don't worry, next week I'll have more PlayStation 1 fun, and I'll have videos throughout the week as well. But if you haven't played Tekken 3 in a while, after this video, load it up, play it, and enjoy it. See you next time. Bye-bye.